Welcome to Table for One. I'm the narrator, and in today's video, I'm going to do a rules refresher for the Quantum Loops module from the Future Imperfect expansion to Anachrony. Let's get rolling. So I am ready to teach you how to play the Quantum Loops module from the Future Imperfect expansion to Anachrony. And this is one of these simpler expansions, so this should be pretty quick. But as usual in these rules refresher videos for Anachrony, which I've got a whole series on, I'm going to follow a particular format. So I'm going to start off by just giving you an overview of what this module does, and then I'll talk to you about compatibility. That is, compatibility with other Anachrony modules, because they're not all compatible with each other. Then I'll tell you what you need to know about setup for using quantum loops. And then I'll get into the main portion, which is the details. Those are the nuts and bolts about how this module works. And then I will have a chapter about how to use quantum loops in solo play with Chronosis, and then I will wrap the whole thing up. So if you're looking for a particular portion, you can jump ahead to that chapter. So let's go ahead and get started with the overview. And this will be very brief, but quantum loops gives you a deck of these 8 quantum loop cards that you can acquire by using this special quantum loop warp tile during the warp phase. And they give special bonuses, and they get paid back with breakthroughs. So next we'll move on to compatibility, and Quantum Loops is compatible with all other Anachrony modules, with the slight caveat that it doesn't work with the Chronobot if you're playing solo, but it does of course work with Chronosis. So a couple things to be aware of though in terms of mixing and matching with other modules. If you are playing with the alternate timelines, so that is this side of the timeline tiles, if you place your Quantum Loop warp tile on this 2x space, you still only get one quantum loop card. You do not get to 2x this particular warp token. The other quick note, and this will make more sense after we've gone through the video, but this card, Cosmic Data Leak, if you are playing with the Intrigues of the Council module and you gain this quantum loop card, you still grab 2 of these endgame condition cards from the box, and if you meet the criteria at the end of the game, you score from them, or specifically you score 3 victory points for each one at the end of the game if you meet their conditions, and then you still score the agenda board. So it essentially works the same way, but that interaction is called out in the rulebook. So that is what you need to know about compatibility. So next, let's get into setup, and that's going to be pretty simple. Each player is going to get one of these quantum loop warp tiles in their player color, and there's also, as I mentioned, a deck of 8 quantum loop cards. You're going to shuffle them all up and place them somewhere accessible to all players, and you're going to flip over the top 3 cards in the deck to form a quantum loop offer. And then you'll just keep the other cards next to it. Now, during setup, if by chance you reveal one of these 2 cards, or both, Time Wave Neutralizer or the Time Loop Amplifier, you draw a replacement card and then shuffle those back into the deck. They are not available during the first era. And to help you remember that, they both have a little asterisk there after their name. So those 2 have an asterisk. You can't get them during the first era. So if you draw those, you just shuffle them back into the deck. And then there is this offer of quantum loop cards now during the game. Now, one other thing I forgot to mention earlier, during setup, if you like, there is a new Superproject Multiverse Hub. You can choose when playing with quantum loops to shuffle this into the Superprojects, and it may or may not be in the timeline when you play. So you can make that choice during setup. But that's it for setup. So let's move now into the details of how this module really works. So as you're playing, during the preparation phase, if there are fewer than 3 cards here, draw cards, as long as there are some still available, until there are at least 3. If there are 3 or more, you don't reduce down, you just don't draw anymore. There should be at least 3 if possible at the beginning of each era, so you take care of that during the preparation phase. Then during the warp phase, as you might imagine, you can choose to use this quantum loop warp tile. So if you do, you place it on the timeline, and then you take one of the available face-up quantum loop cards. And then whatever the effect of the card is, you perform it immediately. Now, if more than one player selects to use the quantum loop tile during the same era, because again, you only have one, but if more than one player uses it during the same era, Those players will choose their cards in turn order, and if you are not the first player to be choosing your quantum loop card and you decide you either don't want any of the cards that are remaining when it gets to you, or if this offer just runs out entirely and there are no more cards, then you are allowed to remove your warp tile at that time, but you cannot place a new warp tile. So remember, there's at least 3 in the offer at the end of the preparation phase, but if it's a 4-player game and 4 people all throw out their quantum loop tiles at the same time, then that 4th person is going to have nothing left. You're not drawing replacements as you take cards. That only happens during the preparation phase, so it can run out. Any game effects that allow you to retrieve a warp tile, and that's usually anomalies, but sometimes other buildings or super projects, you cannot remove or retrieve your quantum loop warp tile that way. So for example, let's use the example of an anomaly. You gain an anomaly, it lets you retrieve a warp tile. The symbol for retrieving a warp tile has these 3 corners dark, just like your player color here. But this quantum loop warp tile does not have 3 dark corners. Sort of the whole thing is dark. So just go based off of that symbol. You have to grab one of these tokens that has the 3 dark corners, not your quantum loop one. You can't retrieve that with an anomaly or other methods like that. So in order to get your quantum loop warp tile back, just like you would for any other warp tile, you have to use the time travel function. So you use a power plant or perhaps another means to move your focus marker back to a previous era that has your quantum loop warp tile on it. And then you must pay back the cost that's at the bottom of the card. So you've got the card in front of you. You pay back that cost, and at that time, you get your token back. This does count as time traveling, so you advance your time travel track, and then whatever that card is, you return it to this offer, just to the end of the offer. So if I had, say, this one in my hand and I had been using it, if I move my focus marker back to here from a future era, of course not the present era, it's got to be coming back from a future era, this says I must have a circle breakthrough. So I pay back my circle breakthrough, and then I gain this back, and then I add the card to this offer here. So that's how at the preparation phase, you may have 3 or more, even if some of these have been taken. So at the end of the game, if you have your quantum loop warp tile out here on the timeline, you can pay it back when you untangle the continuum, as long as you pay whatever the cost is at the bottom. If you choose not to or are unable to pay it back, this is worth twice as many negative VPs as your standard warp tiles. So standard warp tiles are worth -2 VPs. This one remaining on the timeline is -4. So let's now go over these 8 quantum loop cards, as well as the Superproject that's part of the quantum loops module, just so you kind of know what's in here. So each of the quantum loop cards has a different cost to pay it back, but it's always a breakthrough. So 3 of them are the shapes. Here's one that's circle, here's one that's triangle, and here's one that's square. The other 5 are the symbols. So here we have the any shape that's the warfare symbol. Here's the society symbol, the time travel symbol, the technology symbol, and the genetic symbol. So quantum loops definitely helps the breakthrough tiles to play a more prominent role, because these are all pretty powerful, but you do have to sort of plan to be able to pay them back at some point. So let's go through what each of these do real quick. The first is Privileges of the Multiverse. If you gain this quantum loop card, you immediately take a capital action as if you took it with a genius. So that's obviously pretty nice. Next is, I'll go left to right, and then the bottom row. So we've got Future Blueprints. So for this card, you draw the bottom 5 tiles of one of the primary building stacks. So that's either, power plants, factories, life support, or labs. Draw the bottom 5 tiles of the main stack. Not the secondary stack, but the main stack. You pick one of them and you return the others to the bottom of that stack in a random order, and then you build that building immediately at a 1 titanium discount. So that's pretty interesting. The next one is Interdimensional Espionage. This one is particularly crazy. You look at the top 5 tiles from the Superproject stack that you did not use during the game during setup. So during setup, you put the Superprojects above each of the eras, and then whichever ones are unused, you look at the top 5 from that stack. And for the rest of the game, you and only you can build one of those super projects as a normal construct action in addition to the action's normal effects. So you've got your stack of super projects that were not used in the game. You take the top 5 and you look at them and choose one. You basically keep it on top of this card, so it's available for only you to build when you take a construct action. And so when you take a construct action, you do your normal construct and you can build that super project. So you can build 2 things, and you build that super project at a 1 titanium discount. So that's just wild. And that 1 titanium discount is regardless of the worker you use to take the construct action. So it doesn't matter if you built using a scientist or if you built using an engineer. You don't get an additional titanium discount. It's just 1 titanium discount no matter what. And then if you return this card because you've paid back that quantum loop warp tile before you've built the super project, you just shuffle that super project back into the stack, so you kind of lose access to it at that point. The 4th one here is high density universe, and this one says you can spend 1 worker, including a tired one, so they don't have to be an awake motivated worker. You can spend a tired worker to gain 4 titanium, uranium, and or gold in any combination, so 4 standard resources. So that can be very helpful at the beginning of an era. Next is Time Wave Neutralizer, which is one of the ones that you cannot have in Era 1. And this one says you can spend up to 1 neutronium and 2 water to remove up to 2 anomalies from your player board at no additional cost. So sometimes those anomalies can be pretty expensive to get rid of. 1 neutronium and 2 water to get rid of 2 anomalies and keep your workers. You're not losing any workers. That's super helpful, especially if it's towards the end of the game. That could be a quick way to handle some problems. The next one here is Time Loop Amplifier, and this is the other one that you cannot have in Era 1. This one is saying that you gain 1 neutronium and then you pick one of the following twice. You can set your focus back by up to 4 eras, then optionally pay back a warp tile on that timeline tile to advance your time travel track as if you used a power plant, and then reset your focus to the present era when you're done. So again, you're gaining 1 neutronium, then you're time traveling up to 4 eras back, just like you're using normal power plant action, time traveling, advance your time travel marker, get your warp tile off the timeline, then do that a second time, and then reset your focus to the present era. So that's a lot going on, and to gain neutronium instead of spending it on top is super nice. And the next one here is Cosmic Data Leak. This one is to draw 2 unused endgame condition cards. So these are the scoring conditions for the end of the game. You draw 2 unused cards, so ones that are not available during the game, and at the end of the game, only you can score them. So you can still only score them if you meet the criteria, like you have to at least tie or have the most of whatever the asset is of the card. But if you meet the condition, then you gain the points and nobody else can score for those. And then if for some reason there are fewer than 2 cards remaining, you just draw as many as you can. And again, this is the one with the called out sort of interaction with the Intrigues of the Council module, because normally when you play that module, you're scoring off the agenda board, but it kind of works the same way. You still draw 2 of these normal endgame condition cards and score based off of that. So the last quantum loop card is Foreign Labor, and this one has you pay 2 water and decrease your morale track 1 space, but then receive 3 different workers in your active column, and they're coming directly from the supply. So they do need to be different types. So you can choose, you're probably going to pick a genius, but this does combine with fractures of time. So you can pick an operator as well. And then there's engineer, admin, scientist, but as long as they're 3 different ones. And again, they're coming directly from the supply, not from the recruit pool. So those are all pretty cool actions. I think at the cost of just 1 breakthrough, that's a pretty fair cost. And because to pay them back, you either need 1 particular shape or 1 particular symbol. I mean, you can set 1 shape or 1 symbol when doing the research action, so very easy to get the breakthrough you need to pay it back later. But it will make that a more sought after action. So then while we're here, let's talk about this new super project as well, Multiverse Hub. It's worth 6 victory points. The cost is a neutronium and 3 titanium, and you need to pay any 2 breakthroughs to get it. And then this says, when you place a quantum loop tile on the timeline, you select an additional quantum loop card available on the author, with the notable exclusion of interdimensional espionage, because this one involves more super projects, I guess. But you resolve the second card's ability in addition to the one that you took. You do not take the second card. So again, I'll recap. If you have this super project, when you place your quantum loop tile on the timeline, you gain a card like normal, do its effect, and then you choose a second card from the offer and you just take its action without taking the card. So you never have to pay it back, but you get the benefit. So you can't take interdimensional espionage because that requires you to keep a super project on the card until you've either built it or paid it back. And so that's basically everything that has to do with the Quantum Loops module. I'll talk now real quickly about the solo mode, but this is pretty easy as well. So if you're playing against the Chronosis and you want to use Quantum Loops, first of all, there are no action tiles for Chronosis that you need to worry about. So just use the standard action tiles or use those that go with whatever other module or modules you're playing with, but there are no action tiles for Quantum Loops. And then setup is identical. You can choose to add this super project, shuffle up the Quantum Loop cards, reveal 3 of them to make an offer. You cannot have Time Loop Amplifier or Time Wave Neutralizer in the offer on the first era. And then the real change comes during the warp phase. So during each warp phase, when the Chronosis places at least 1 warp tile, then you roll the AI die. That's that black and red die that the Chronosis uses to take its actions. And if and only if you roll a 4, then you remove the Quantum Loop card furthest to the right from the offer, and it's just gone. So I'll demonstrate here real quick. So we've got our stack here, our 3 cards in the offer, and we say that Chronosis has placed 1 warp tile on the timeline. We roll the AI die, it's a 4. Then we just take the rightmost and we remove it, and it goes by the Chronosis, but Chronosis never interacts with it with any way, and it'll never come back. So that card's basically just out of the game. Now let's say, on that same era, I grab this card, so this is in my hand. Next era, preparation phase, we reveal a couple more cards. And now if I go back and pay back this card, I pay back with this society breakthrough with the time travel action, I add this furthest to the right. So in the next era, if Chronosis were to take another card, they're going to start from the right. So they're most likely to take the one that I have already used, leaving the ones that I haven't used more likely to be available for me. And when you're playing solo, if you draw the Cosmic Data Leak card, or if you earn this card, if you take it, this Cosmic Data Leak, you just draw 2 of these solo endgame condition cards and put them into play. So you go from having 3 of those solo objectives to 5, and you score for all of them. And of course, Chronosis never scores for those endgame objectives. And if you want to increase the difficulty on Quantum Loops, one thing you can do is when you roll that AI die, instead of removing the rightmost card when you roll a 4, remove it when you roll a 4 or a 5. So when you roll a 4, there's a 1 in 3 chance of that happening. If you make it a 4 and a 5, that's a 50-50 chance of that happening. And then another suggestion is when you remove a Quantum Loop card, the Chronosis also receives 2 victory points. So that's it. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the Quantum Loops module, but at the same time I release this video, I will release a solo playthrough, me against the Chronosis, using the Quantum Loops module so you can see it in action. And I really like this one, along with Hypersync, which I did the other week, because it's just so compatible and it adds a lot of cool stuff without a lot of rules overhead. This one's really simple to implement, and it works. It plays nice with fractures of time, which is pretty important to most people. So go ahead and check out that playthrough if you like. And don't forget, I've got a whole boatload of these rules refresher videos for the other Anachrony modules. The only one I have not covered yet that at least applies to solo play is Fractures of Time. That's the big one. And then I don't know if I'm going to cover any of the non-solo specific stuff. So Intrigues of the Council, you can't solo with that one, so I don't know if I'm going to cover it. And then there's a couple other small things like draft variants, a Sentry Post promo card. I don't know if those really need rules refresher videos, but it's always a possibility. But for everything else, I've already got it out there. You can find my Anachrony playlist and check it all out in there. And again, there's playthroughs with each of those modules so you can see how they work. Otherwise, please do consider subscribing, liking the video, sharing it, and leaving some comments. I really do appreciate each of those things. But that's what I've got for you in this video. Thank you so much for watching Table for One. I hope you have an awesome week, and I will see you next time.